Good morning, good afternoon, good day. I don't know where everybody is. We want to welcome you to our third session of Unpacking Decolonization with MenEngage. And today we're exploring theory and practice. And our guest is Kopano Ratele. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Ne? Kopano Ratele, yes. And thank you for being here today. And maybe if you just introduce yourself and let us know who you are to start. And then we're going to do, I don't know, Bianca, is it okay if we do a check-in in small groups of 2, just to check in, and then we come back and we start? Is it okay for you?
It is. I'm just going to need 1 minute, but yes.
Okay, so we just start with Kopano letting us know who he is.
Okay, yes, because I was bad, but the pet day again, you had asked me to send you something and I did not. I apologize.
It's okay. We're here now. That's what's important.
Well, thank you very much to Lakshman and Bianca Nontokozo speaking for all of you for this. It was a short notice. I am surprised that I said yes because it's a mad few months for me, but I am glad to be here. My name is Kopano Ratele. I'm sitting at Stellenbosch, South Africa. I'm sitting at a place called STIA, Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Study. It's an institute that invites fellows, younger fellows on a program called Isolomso, and then older ones like myself, I suppose, for when you're more established. So I'm here for the next 2 months. I do work also at Stellenbosch, about 1 kilometer from here in the Department of Psychology, where I teach African psychology, among other things. I teach Fanon at graduate level, postgraduate level. Yes, so that's my affiliation. The people who pay me my salary, most of my salary, at Stellenbosch University. I moved here just over a year ago, a year and a half ago, because I had run away from teaching. I had found that I was not enjoying teaching as much. So for a decade and a half, I went to a research institute. I was a director of at some points of a public health in a unit on violence and then on masculinities. The second one was on masculinities, but I was missing teaching, but also I wanted to return to psychology because I think we still owe ourselves a clean, good fight with global psychology.
Thank you. That's beautiful. That's beautiful to hear. It's good to say. I'm going to hand it over to you, Kopano.
Thank you, Nontokozo, and thank you, and hello, everyone. I want to start elsewhere, probably unexpected, but hopefully some of you here like the same sorts of things, are artists, or engaged in other kinds of pursuits other than academic knowledge and activism and advocacy. And I'm sorry about the noise. Some people are in the corridor here, so I beg your pardon. I want to start, let me show just one slide. And I'm hoping that we can break this, I thought 4, probably 3 parts, and then we will talk in between. And the first thing I want to share with you, can you allow me to share, Bianca, please? It's just one word. I'm sure some of you are interested in music. And one of the things that I would like us to take at the end is precisely how there's an important connection between, and I will keep on saying this because I work in in an academic environment. I'm a researcher at the university, but I've learned over the last, since I started working in this area of men, masculinities, boys, gender justice, transforming masculinity, is there's a gap between academic knowledge and the work of activists, particularly if there's two groups. Of course, some people traverse this a lot more easily. So the work that we do in the journals, in the books, the work of making creative work, creative practice, but also other knowledges, as decolonialists might call them, other knowledges outside of institutionalized or formal modern colonial settings. So music. I want to ask a simple question. Can we talk about music? What music are you listening to? That's the number one. What music are you listening to right now in this last week? And then I want a second question. How did you get to like this music or listen to this music? How did you get to like this music and learn to like this music? I wonder whether I should just tell you a simple thing. This is important about one reason in my head anyway, that when I drive to work, when I used to drive, not right now really, when I used to drive quite a lot, I would find that there was one or two stations that I listened to quite a lot. One is a talk radio, the other is a music, a commercial station. And so the people around me also listen to this commercial station, less so to the talk radio. And so it happens everywhere. There's some stations that are very popular, that most people at the curve, at the top of the curve, the bulk of people listen to. Could you take a few minutes? We don't have to break up. We can have comments if I can get help, for instance, or we could go on a short 5 minutes break. What music are you listening to? How did you get to listen to this music to learn to like this music? What do you suggest, Nontokozo? Should we go on a break for 5 minutes or?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good. And
Is that good for you, Bianca? Before we do that, because we can do it in a big group. Which one is easy for you?
I can reopen the same rooms and then just assign new people to those rooms. So I would need a minute. I'd need, because there's a lot of people that have just joined.
Yeah, and also the language.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, easier is going to be this time round to do it here in the room, and maybe you can just read from the chat if that works, and then I will create rooms for future times.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I just saw first one from Jeremy Solomons. With a 6-month-old, I have come to appreciate Wheels on the Bus again. I know that song. Everybody, anyone who has children listens to it like 1,000 times. And anybody who can read other languages other than English could help. I see somebody from Ratele, Felix Alpizarra Ramirez. I don't know whether saying anything about music.
No, it doesn't say anything about music. It was just a technical issue. So then I encourage people to unmute. I encourage people to unmute and say and just speak out the music that you're listening to and why do you like it and why. So just feel free to unmute because I'm not able to see everybody on my screen. And also some of you can write on the chat. So let's go.
I'm listening to a lot of 80s pop music. That's because Nick. Of my dad.
Whoa, everybody's going at the same time.
This is Nick. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Can you
Nick,
hear me?
we can hear you.
Okay. I've been listening this week to Harry Belafonte songs from the Caribbean because he was the most important singer in my childhood, and he died recently. So everybody's playing his records about Jamaica Farewell and all the other songs that we used to love. And he's certainly the first Black person that I met whose music I loved and whose personality I loved, because he was a great movie actor as well as a great singer. And I had the pleasure of meeting him once, and I told him he was so important in my childhood. And he was probably the first person of color that I felt was close to me. And I said, "You must be tired of hearing that." And he said, "No, I love to hear that anytime, any place, because that's the purpose of my life, to bridge the racial gaps and the cultural gaps and national gaps." So I love to hear his songs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm seeing a lot of names here, but would anybody just
Thank you.
anybody else?
Anybody else?
Good morning. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Hi, I am Tyrone Ali. I'm from the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. Listening to music has really been a journey. I cannot pinpoint a particular genre of music, but I can particular my trajectory through music. I grew up in a traditional Indian home. I'm Indian, East Indian, and I'm the son of ancestors who came from India into the New World. And my family grew up listening to Indian music, Bollywood music, film music of India, largely because of my parents and their identity with India. However, when I became an adolescent, I switched and I listened to American pop because, that was the neo-colonial impact on the Caribbean at the time. Then traditionally, when we have our carnival season, everybody in Trinidad and Tobago listens to calypso and soca because those art forms were born here, right? And as the last speaker said, I have grown to appreciate my Caribbean heritage and Caribbean identity more so now, that if I am to pinpoint at this point in time a particular music, I think it would be a mix of genre, still American pop, but those that have been heavily influenced by Caribbean identity, Caribbean constructions, and Caribbean sense of being. Thank you.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I ask one person here online? This is Parnaze Peruzi. Could you come online and tell us about the Western classical music and then Iranian traditional music, and then the book on Iranian violin, please?
So my father left Iran when he was 21 to study in the United States on a scholarship. And he would play Western classical music all the time. We were immersed in it. Once in a while, he would play the traditional Iranian music with the drums and the violin, and once in a while. And we were all supposed to be a Western classical quartet. So we trained for years and years. And then one time when I was in Paris, I thought, let me see if I can find the music of the traditional, because the scales in different cultures are different. And so in Iran, the scale has a lot of half tones in it. And I was very surprised to find this book of Iranian violin in Paris. It was not.
Oh, we just lost.
It was nothing we were taught anywhere else. I found this violin book in Paris. It had all, because the scale is very different. It has lots of half tones, and it's very different from Western classical scales. And but we were never exposed to it anywhere else, even though we had the most marvelous professor at our university, Richard Davis, who played bass, and he was a very great he is a very great jazz bassist. We never got exposed to this type of music anywhere else.
Thank you very much for that. I'm wondering, because I am, and this is a really important point for our interaction, because I'm not, I know South African languages quite a bit, I think 6 other languages, but I don't know Spanish and French and C. So anybody wants to, who's written in French, wants to speak about the music that they wrote about before I come back. Anybody else? Anybody wants to volunteer? Okay.
Oui.
Okay.
Oui, bonjour.
Hello.
Est-ce que vous me recevez? Est-ce que vous me recevez? Je peux aller?
Oui, on vous entend, madame. On vous entend.
OK. J'aimerais parler de la musique francophone. Moi, je viens d'un pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, plus précisément un pays francophone. Et je dirais que la musique francophone, plus précisément chez nous, regorge beaucoup de proverbes et vraiment nous permet de se connecter avec la source, de se connecter avec nos anciens. Genre, vous écoutez beaucoup de proverbes, beaucoup de paroles qui sont très codées et souvent ça permet de se ressourcer et des fois en face de certains problèmes, tu arrives à les écouter et ça t'apaise ou des fois tu trouves même des solutions ou des réponses à certaines difficultés grâce à ces genres de musique. Merci beaucoup.
I got very little of that. So anybody wants to give us a shortened summary version of that, if you don't mind? What I'm trying to get to see in a very short space of time is about and we had a wonderful range about Harry Belafonte, traditional Iranian music with violin and the father playing Western classical music. And for instance, that it takes a bit of effort. And the second narrative we received was about that. It takes a bit of effort to not listen to the music that you grew up with, the music that's placed in the house. It takes effort. It takes, and this word I will use several times, conscientization, right? And this is Paul Freire's word, a kind of awakening about I am not listening to other music. I wonder what other musics exist in the world. And this doesn't apply, of course, to only music. It applies in decoloniality, as we speak about quite a lot. It applies to you a certain attitude, a certain decolonial attitude, adopting a certain attitude to want to listen to a music. You might not call it that, you might call it other things. I want to hear other things. And so the world is organized in a particular way, whether it's musically or whether it's, as I will show you shortly with this, this thing that's been on my mind quite a bit. Yeah, the world is organized in a certain way, to be a certain way. And we tend to take for granted that what we see and what we hear is the way the world is. So it appears as decolonial theories always as just natural. This word, just natural. It's normal. It exists that way. And you might remember historically this, and it still happens, that there is no alternative. So musically, sometimes you might think there's no alternative. You listen to, and I saw some wonderful music people spoke about. So where I grew up, even when you didn't have a radio, there would be a radio blasting on the road. And so you pick up as a child a particular kinds of music. And this constitutes your own identity, musically speaking, if you're just a listener. But same thing, the books around you, the way the world appears is constituted in a particular way. And as I will say repeatedly, so this order of not just of music, this order of certain kinds of structuring, a certain structuring of the world, a certain structuring of our affects, of our feelings, a certain structuring of the world, the physical world, how it's organized, how houses are built, how cities are organized. And you can take how knowledge is organized. For instance, where I work, we work in departments. Departments come with the disciplines. And we say you can only go this way. And it takes exercise to step outside of that. It takes a certain attitude, which we'll speak about. So a few years back, when this settled in me, I did a small book called The World Looks Like This for me. And there's many things I didn't say because I was trying two things at once. I was trying to challenge how psychology is organized, what we teach in classes, that what is called psychology, and I have to speak about psychology, connect with psychology, because this is now the discipline that I'm back in, but we will connect to work on men and boys. So it's organized in a particular way. It has institutionalized. So institutionalization is a really important thing. It's institutionalized in a particular way. So if I wanted to do simple examples, if I wanted to do music, but I'm also doing psychology, it's really hard. It's as simple as that. It's really hard. You'd have to negotiate the structures because the structures lock us in a particular way. So the world looks a particular way because it's made to look in that way. It's organized in that way. It's a really important thing that, and for 500 years now, and somebody used this term today, the New World, they call it the New World. So when European men mostly left that corner of Asia, and they traveled to Asia to larger Asia, and then they went to, I need to end this, somebody calling me. I don't know how to do that. I want to leave it. So they left Europe, they went to Africa, they went to the Americas, what's now North America and Latin America. And so Africa, larger Asia. It was an epoch-changing moment in the world. And Euro modernity really begins at this point, right? And one of the tools that we know, of course, is how the world is structured around race. Race becomes quite a big way of thinking about the world. But really, this is both an economic, fundamental economic project of running the world. So, and that has affected how knowledge comes to us, what we teach, not just in the discipline psychology, but really all throughout the university. And I like this picture quite a bit. This is how the world is organized, and we take it in this country. This is a wonderful project you might want to look at by Joni Miller. Basically, it takes a camera and photographs this world sitting side by side, and you can find it online. Joni Miller is the photographer. He moved from the US to South Africa and shows this. So for the world on the left to exist today, the world on the left, this picture, the world on the right must exist. It supports it with labor, it And the labor, of course, is underpaid. And so capitalist coloniality works in particular. I like this, when you put it side by side, you realize that the people on the right tend to work on the left, never the other way around, generally, unless they are engineers or town planners and some of us who work right there. But the labor, extracted labor that is underpaid comes up. So the world is organized in a particular way. And that's a really important thing. And we can grapple with this at some length. So I want to say, now just jump a little bit to masculinity. So there's a story we tell about men and masculinity. And this story has worried me for a long time. I just checked it again today, and we'll come back to it. So in the book by Lucas Kotzen, who I love, the work I love, by the way, I participate in all of this. And this has nothing to do but it has something to do with individual, but it also has to turn in your gaze, looking again at the world in a particular way. So in the beginning of that book, Lucas Kotzen, Temi Schaefer, close friend of mine, Ulf Mellström, editor of Norma, say something interesting. They ask, so how do you map this idea of masculinity studies? They're interested in masculinity studies. And we can do this exercise in MenEngage. I'm sure you have done it somewhere. So map when does activism around engaging men involvement begin? Who starts it? Where does it start? But I'm interested in this particular narrative. So how is this field, this knowledge practice, this community of practice organized? I've been interested in this question for a long time. And of course, you can see it connects what I'm talking about, music. The world in which we participate, all of us, is organized in a particular way. One, the core, two things that they answer to in response to their own question is that a group of men, and they're right, the group of men came together and they established the studies part, so the research part, the theory part, what's called critical masculinity studies, critical studies of men and masculinities. In the 70s, I think, and all of us come to participate. And I would say to them, and I know I engage with that group who are wonderful people. I'm not joking, but unless you start to rethink about what is the subject of the work we do, what is at the center, what are its assumptions, mapping the terrain, like what is this repressed? Really, you start to see that. And I wanted to offer a drawing, but my tools are limited. That, of course, gender is at the center of this, gender justice, at the center of the work we do. Men's gender, for instance, men in relation to other men, men in relation to women, men in relation to children. So gender is an important part. But unless you understand something quite basic, that the world changed fundamentally 500 years ago or about it, fundamentally. And it made some men who were living, when this group of men who left Europe came to Abiyala, to Latin America and Africa. And when they came, they changed the relations of men to their own bodies, to their own land. And some men, I mean, this happens particularly with enslavement. It happens because some people become not men, they become not quite men, they become property. That's a really important part right there. So from then on, the subject of masculinity studies of men and even the advocacy we work has to reckon with this. And I'm putting to us that it doesn't reckon enough because gender is buried within this since then. This idea of gender is locked into this thing called coloniality, colonization. So I'll come back to that. So this is where I want to stop for the first part, that we have introduced a world that is organized for 500 years, 5 centuries at least. It reorganizes the world. And so when we're speaking about gender without speaking about this moment, I think we're reproducing this world that you see on screen. We're really saying, well, these people who live on the right side, not quite human in the way that some of us are. And many of us probably live on the left side of the picture in one sense. So we have billions of people who have been made into property, or at least less than human, dehumanizing, infrahumanized, if you will, all kinds of processes. And those processes follow from that moment of discovery, as they call it, discovery of new world. So this is where I want to, before I get now to put to you some terms that are important in thinking about this 500 years, but also the work we do. We can take questions, we can discuss this, we can bring back quote into rooms, if you will, and discuss particularly how this. So let me just put it to you clearly. So what I would like us to talk about is, so if we were to draw a picture about gender without coloniality, without this moment of colonization, and then gender with it, how does it look? How does the world look? If you say, and I've drawn it myself, but I'm learning how to draw. They say I shouldn't say I'm not. Nobody is not good at drawing. So I want you to represent this picture. What we have in this knowledge and practice field we have is gender in the middle. But I have put it to you that actually you can't just do that. Gender is enveloped within coloniality. So how does that picture look to you if you were to take this seriously and rewrite it in one sense? Like, I'm going to look again at gender, not the way I have been hearing it, if it's music, but the way approaching it with this idea of a changed world 500 years ago.
Thank you. Wow. Maybe if you stop sharing a bit so we can see each other. And also I invite people to switch on your cameras. This way we can really see each other, and also the speaker has people that they are interacting with. And I feel like we're really talking about something really deep. We just, for me at least, I, as a South African who lives in the diaspora, seeing that picture just took me back home. The whole colonization, the history, the injustices, the inequalities. And what I'm hearing from you, Kopano, now I want to speak my language with you. What I'm hearing is, let's question how are we approaching this, the topic of gender, right? How are we, because it is obviously that we live in a colonial, in the past 500 years, it's been, everything is under colonization. Therefore, that means even this topic of gender is looked from that lens. And I'm hearing you inviting us to dream, like a dream state of what would it look like if it was not from that point of view, and also questioning ourselves of the way it is. What does that mean? And what does it look like? Let's talk about it. Let's share. And so I think for this round, I would like you to raise your hands. I'm gonna do my best to go through. I have 4 pages here. So when you raise your hand, and we can then start expressing ourselves, what we're hearing, what we're understanding. Do we have any questions? Thank you for those who are showing your faces, beautiful faces, beautiful to see you. Not that those that are not showing their faces, you don't have beautiful faces, but thank you for showing your faces. Okay. Let's not be shy. I see Pilar. Pilar, you raised your hand. Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for a very interesting talk. I'm sort of listening to it as a podcast while I'm on a journey somewhere.
Oh, okay.
One of the things I was thinking about though during the conversation is how gender interacts with other social identities that people have. And I was wondering about the implications of the impingement of some of the social identities and how gender is expressed and how, say, some people enjoy
just a moment. Could you please unmute? There's some people that are not muted. If you can just mute them. Thank you. I'm sorry, Pilar, please continue.
Okay, just to finish the thought, how, say, does race affect the privileges and the disprivileges, or the opposite of privilege, the disadvantages that one might have due to their gender? Could you speak a little bit to that, about how different aspects of one's identity will affect also how gender and the things that we usually assume come with gender, say privilege or disadvantage, are affected and mediated by these other social identities?
Nontokozo, you must tell me if you want me. Thank you very much for that, Pilar.
Thank you, Pilar. It's up to you, but I would rather for now that we park that question. It's a great question that we just continue with with the discussion that we've asked. If there's people, and then we can go back to that if you want to answer it, Kopano. Just a reminder that it's not necessary that we answer all the questions, but if you wish to answer the questions, you may do so. But maybe for now, we just stay with what Kopano has asked us, has proposed to us as a discussion.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it would be great if there are people that want to add to it. Kopano had proposed something, and it would be great if we talk about that before we move on. And I see Pilar, am I saying your name correctly?
Okay, hola, ¿cómo están? Yo soy Pilar Montalvo, soy una mujer huanca, es descendiente de un pueblo indígena de Perú. Mi reflexión y pregunta va en lo siguiente. Nosotros hemos sido pueblos colonizados hace más de 500 años y eso ha trastocado, ha cambiado nuestros usos y costumbres y cada una de las personas que estábamos antes de la colonia teníamos roles fundamentales, cada uno tenía su rol, cada uno jugaba un papel dentro de la cultura y también habían poblaciones LGTBI. Viene la cultura, trastoca todo eso, otorga nuevos roles a nuevas personas, obviamente unos arriba, otros abajo, e invisibiliza, por ejemplo, a los pueblos LGTBI que existían antes de la colonización. Y mi pregunta va en el sentido de que muchos de nosotros que somos líderes y activistas vamos luchando por la colonización, o sea, queremos romper eso que nos ha dejado la colonización, queremos hacer acciones, hablar, alzar nuestra voz para no ser discriminados, pero dentro de nosotros hemos hecho muy poco para decir y hablar, por ejemplo, que existían pueblos indígenas de la diversidad sexual, ¿no? O dentro de nuestras culturas luchamos contra el colonialismo, pero muchos de nuestros partners o compañeros hombres no luchan por esa violencia hacia las mujeres o esos roles al que le han dedicado a la mujer solo el rol de cuidado. Y eso es lo que no levantamos en nuestra agenda. Entonces mi pregunta es, ¿cómo rompemos también al interior del movimiento anticolonialismo ese tipo de cosas? Gracias.
Thank you. Kopano, were you able to hear the translation? Did your button work? Or would you like a summary?
I did get most of it, yes.
Okay, great. Would you like to answer that, or would you like us to
No, I can go ahead and pick up.
Okay.
Yes, both of them are interesting to me. So, and then there's a third one by Joe Owen online, which I would also pick up. So let me start with what the other pillar was saying. Let me start with that. And it's going to move me into the next part of this discussion. And I think it'll clarify. Time flies so fast. So while I'm talking, can I share screen again while I'm talking? So you will know this man. I took this picture of him. I take pictures quite a lot. Besides the music, image making has become really important to me. This is Nelson Maldonado Torres, who visits South Africa quite a lot in the last decade or so. Well-known theorist of decoloniality. And so, Pilar, what you're asking is at the center of what I want to get out of this. So, one of the key concepts of this vocabulary that Nelson Maldonado Torres and other thinkers from Latin America, many of them, as well as some from the African continent, this new language, so there's two languages. There's a language of decolonization, and then there's a language of decoloniality. They work in tandem, and that's an important distinction. I'm sure I watched the previous interaction on MenEngage, and this is really important because what the language that we are now like from Latin America adds to the language of another person I will mention later, Ngugi. But also a lot of people who have been doing this around the world, in Africa, again, Latin America, in Asia, and some in the US, in the global north. So the problem I'm sitting with, Pilar, is this: is if it is true, and I think it is, that the world changed fundamentally. So there was no language of race. And so European modernization, colonialism introduces classes. It classifies people. A classification is a huge part of it. It classifies and it refigures how we relate to each other. It says the African is Black. So that's an important part, right? It makes people Black. It makes the slave into Black. When it enslaves you, it says, so it needs knowledge to justify its pillaging, its rape, its murder, its selling of human bodies. And so certain bodies are classified in that sense. It's an imperial project. The colonial project is an imperial project, and it continues for hundreds of years. So if it is true that it changes how we think of gender, so what you might call the coloniality of gender, if it changes the way we think about women's bodies, other bodies, other genders, so this diversities, and it classifies, what's the relationship between gender then and this force that changes the world? That's a really important thing. So that force underpins how we think of gender. It's not lying on the same plane, right? That's an important part. It doesn't lie on the same plane. So race itself in this category, if race, and I want to move to speak about coloniality rather than race, because race, yes, it's a core part of coloniality, but coloniality reshapes, remakes, and reimagines how we think about ourselves as male-bodied people, female-bodied people. So they don't sit on the same plane. That's a really important distinction. You have to come back to it. It doesn't sit, and so it refigures everything. So that you have to think of the relationship not as sitting on the same plane, right? That they're nested in each other, as a matter of fact. So that's a really important point. So when we're speaking about intersectionality in one sense, it's a language that's important, but you have to think about this intersectionality itself is embedded within coloniality. And here's Maldonado Torres. Nelson Maldonado Torres has a thing that you can find online called the Outline of 10 Pieces on Coloniality and Decoloniality. He says he's concretizing in a short, but 37 pages, and you can find it on the Frantz Fanon Foundation website, but it's also everywhere. So a shorter version and a longer version. And here's something he says, there's a language of basically colonization and decolonization. And I will come back to it. This language is really important, but it's like Zulu and Xhosa here. Maybe not Zulu and Xhosa. Maybe it's Venda, which is quite the north. It's different, but they're language of the same country, as it were, but they're different languages. So colonization and decolonization. And then there's coloniality and decoloniality. So these are part of the movement around the world. And to go to question by the second pillar, which I like, about how do this get men to understand. So these languages, by all of them, are used now to challenge racial, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, conservative, liberal, neoliberal politics. So we use these languages to challenge that, right? We use these different kinds of languages, the tools that they offer, the knowledges that are buried in those languages to challenge this. But colonization tend to be thought of as in administrative terms, that it starts in a certain point and it ends in a certain moment, and it becomes neo-colonialism, for instance, in the languages of Nkrumah, who was the first president of Ghana, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, a Kenyan writer and essayist, as you know, a lot of people, but I'm mentioning just this two. There's a lot of people who've been doing this work. Walter Rootney did the work, and then a name that I mentioned quite a lot in my own thinking, Fanon. So while colonization was supposed to be in the past, more and more of us, musicians, painters, intellectuals, activists, I think are realizing that no, actually coloniality is part of our lives. And Nelson, in another context, writes something else. So I recommend, highly recommend this, because the more you read about it, you realize that as he says here, I hope you can still see, and I think it is here. Oh, the last sentence, we breathe coloniality. So Nelson says, so colonialism then is a political economic relation. So one nation, the European settlers come and settle somewhere else, or sometimes indirect rule, and then the power of this settled countries is basically evacuated, and it changes the relationships. So empire is an important part. There are empires right now. You have the US empire, of course, which works in a different way. And then you have had all kinds of empires around the world. So coloniality, the language of coloniality says, well, actually, what was left behind was patterns of power. And they emerge out of this relationship between dominant countries and subordinate countries, powerful countries. In South Africa right now, our president and people are, and the press is on his case because he was not invited to Japan, I think it was. But that relation of the G7 or the G20 is also a relation of powerful nations and the rest of the world. And so you have that. I don't know. I guess you have to want to be part of that if you want to be among the powerful. So coloniality refers to these long-standing patterns of power. They emerge out of colonialism, and they define culture. They define labor. They define activism. They define some relationships we have with each other, relationship we have with our own bodies. That's really important about how you think of your own body, for instance. Relationships to knowledge, relationships to beauty, relationship to, quite important, to the land, right? To the land around us. Because at a certain moment, people start owning the land. We own the land. The land is so the humans own the land, they own other animals. And that's a really important part. And this idea about how the world comes from that moment of colonialism. Of course, there were other kinds of colonialism, but this is a European colonialism that comes into this world. And so knowledge production as well is affected, and it happens much longer. So other people would use the words like neocolonialism. The language of coloniality is not, even neocolonialism doesn't offer us all of the tools we can. So coloniality, then you find it in the libraries, you find it in performance, in activism, in organizations, in the common sense, in the images we have, in the self. All of our experience is buried in there. And so we have to work really hard to get out of how the world is made to appear. And he says this was, in a way, modern subjects breathe coloniality all the time, every day. And I must say, this place is wonderful where I am, but it is a part of coloniality. This part is fantastic, but I am very aware about how you can't, it has to exclude quite a lot of people. So that's that distinction that makes it possible to think differently about what's called intersectionality, the relationship between gender, sexualities, disability, race, because Joy Owen asked us this question, if we had no influence from the outside, I like the way you framed it, Joy. If we had no experience from the outside, experience of gender would be based on what bodies do. I like that because you were going in that direction that I'm thinking. It says, well, the truth is we don't know how we would think about it, but decoloniality is an attempt to do that. And we think about other ways of thinking of ourselves, of our experiences, of our knowledges, of how we organize our lives, right? That's it. So we don't quite know, but we know we have to step outside of universities to find people who are organizing lives differently. We have to step outside of the urban, modern, colonial order to understand how this works. And I'm hoping, I didn't answer quite fully the second pillar response. Yes, and here's something I'm going to turn, I will say in a different way. It was always surprising for me at some point that you could have sexist anti-racist. I found it quite weird that you would have people who are anti-racist and then they're sexist. Like, how does this work? And that Marxists could be violent. Yes, of course, it makes sense. So you could find feminist colonialists as well, that colonialists who are feminists. And I'm going to come back to this. So that some men who are oppressed by colonialism also become oppressors. And this is, Paul Freire uses this word, sub-oppressors. I love that word. They're sub-oppressors, like little tiny oppressors. We have this our space. We can oppress women in this space. It's a fantastic phrase that you learn the model of relating from the oppressor and you take it into your house. So in this thing I mentioned when we began, so for a long time I'm still studies gender, and we study violence. We study how many people die in a country. We have a register. We go to mortuaries and we just enumerate. It's a really simple project, but it takes quite a lot of work. So to count who dies from what. And again, it's a part of modern invention. I don't know why I'm doing this. I said modern because I wanted to say colonial modern. But we know from the death statistics that people who are likely to die will be poorer, will be younger. You can mention, so there are people who live in the bubble. In South Africa, it's a weird thing. Of course, you can die, even if you are rich, super rich, at a hotel. But the likelihood of dying is much lower, much lower. The rates are much lower. We know this. We know this all over the world. We know this in the US, we know. So the likelihood is is concentrated in what's called areas of concentrated disadvantage, right? But of course, there's a history to that. There's a history to that. So the men who received this violence, and I'm pointing in this way, who received from colonial structures, they do back-breaking work, or they're unemployed. They take out that violence on others, but also they take it on each other. That's the important part right there. And repeatedly, when we talk about these statistics, sometimes we don't talk about this thing because it feels as if we're justified. So the answer to this is a long way to respond to this. But these men, of course, don't quite have a simple thing. Conscientization, knowledge that this you are hurting. This is bell hooks, right? You are hurting others because you're being hurt. That you were hurt. You're taking out your hurt on others. And I think Audre Lorde also in conversation with, I think it was Audre Lorde with James Baldwin, wonderful, wonderful thing. I always say you want to go back to see. It is possible to have allies, to have amazing people in different bodies working and understanding the problem. And of course, it is Audre Lorde. Please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm thinking it is that, but why do you take it out on me? Why do you take out this pain out on me? Because really the pain has to be, the rage has to be directed. Rage is an important part of decolonial strategies. And somebody called Hugo Canham in South Africa has written about that. And some people have been written. I think Audre Lorde also writes about Bell Hooks writes about that. That the structures are the ones that are giving pain. So this men that you're talking about need this work, conscientization, critical awakening. They need work on gender, but the work on gender that includes an understanding of coloniality. Nontokozo?
Yes, I'm here. I'm observing all this knowledge. Thank you so much, Kopano. It's a mouthful. I'm hearing the first part that I kind of got stuck with was going outside of our institutions that are based on colonial thinking, and seeing other ways of being. And I think this reminds me of indigenous ways of being that we still somehow manage to preserve, that could somehow be of assistance in battling, or should I say rather, in finding a new way of being, right? A new way of doing things that is not so new as well because it's indigenous, but how do we connect with that? How do we connect with those old ways, the different ways of being? And I'm also sensing also how complex it is to reconnect with those ways if they're not so readily available. And also if they're not so embedded in our so-called new world, right? Systems of new world. How do we access them? And how, when we access them, how do we bring them back into making sure that they're part of the way we are as activists, for example, as change makers, to use them to create the new world that we want to see that is fair and just for everybody. So I'm left with that deep question.
No, right? Thank you. May I come back in those? Yeah. For instance, so you are framing this in another way, which some people online have been doing. If you were there, I think where I started with the music is what Nontokozo is. Well, we don't have to. Of course, we can if there is a way to go 500 years ago to think about that history, and we must always be inventing methodologies. I'm hoping right at the end of this we're going to speak about some of the things we might do as MenEngage. So we don't have to. Not all of us have the tools, but we must invent those tools. What I'm saying is there is a way, as Nontokozo said, we can rehumanize. So the work of engaging men for us, as a practical as that, is the work of rehumanizing, right? If the men these men and boys and women who are dehumanized, and they're dehumanizing women and children. The work is not just in the transformation of masculinity. Part of the core part is this work that we can imagine ourselves in a different way. We can sidestep the colonial logics that somebody has written. I think is Haley, and I'd like Haley to speak because I'm going to go to your comment. So it is not really a view too far. What I was doing with music is I have been reading this text. I have been listening to this particular kind of music. At some moment, I realized, actually, I would like, and I might have heard, just like we're hearing it, I heard somebody called Richard Mwamba a long time. I don't know how I had gotten to him, but I remember he was playing music that I was not used to. The music that is not played on South African radio. He was playing Baleke Sissoko. He was playing Alifar Kature. He was playing Miriam, not Miriam of South Africa, but that too you can add. So you start to, somebody has planted a seed somewhere. You're thinking, okay, I'm going to dig into this. And then I started to find all this. This past week I was looking, I wonder who else, what was the first core music that was recorded? That's as simple as that. I want to listen to that. I want to go back to somewhere, and I realize how the technology itself. So some people somewhere in Mali or somewhere in the world, but Mali in particular, playing the core, Sonar Jobarte, right? And somebody recorded them. So we have to create instruments. Recording is great. We live in a world where you can record stuff all the time. But that's that moment of preserving knowledge for me, well, somebody preserved the knowledge and I'm going to listen to it. Of course, if I wanted to preserve the music, I create instruments and people do that. And that's also part of the knowledge. So in one sense, you turn your head, if you're me anyways, I want to read different texts. I want to listen to different kinds of music. I want to listen to Caetano Veloso, for instance. I didn't know when I was growing up. I want to listen to Thomas Mafumo, who was close by, but I wasn't listening to him when I grew up. And the music of the world starts to open up. I realized that music, somebody mentioned Iranian music, I didn't know this idea of the top 100, it can mess you up because it, as the people say, it replays music quite a lot around you and it closes you to other kinds of experience, musical experience, as simple as that. So, and then of course, other people go outside of the university, they do what's called, I'm giving one example, something called sage philosophy. So, okay, philosophy was not done, they say philosophy was not African, but there were people who were doing this thing called sage thought. The people who were in communities who were thinking and they record them. And there's a whole kinds of stuff. So we can find, we can turn our heads, but also start to step away from what the world is made to look like. Haley Matut, you have said something quite interesting online. And the second thing you said, the first thing Haley says is, what has been sobering in my own work has been the realization that the work of colonialists has been so effective that one finds that most people struggle to imagine reality that are not founded. Absolutely, this is that's the point, Haley, and I know you know this. So the colonial logic does this loop again, that this is good, and it comes, it's got certain assumption, it comes back again and again, and you are in this loop until you break it out in some little way, because it's all around us. You have to find a different way of breathing, as it were. But you say something else here. Could you say it in your own ways? I'm not quite full. I'm pulling part of it about Maldonado Torres and the coloniality of being part of the weave.
Sorry, Prof. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to repeat what I'd said in the comments.
I'm not following it quite clearly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, you highlighted the bit that Maldonado Torres reminds us of about that coloniality is all encompassing, is everywhere, as he says, it's in the air we breathe. Right. So now I'm thinking about this as a psychological researcher because that's where my work is. and I am and thinking that one of the things that I wish we could do is abolish gender. This is something that feminists have been saying for a long time, because that much of our troubles are founded in these ideas we have about gender, especially in this kind of like modern way, as you frame it, because of course you and Nelson remind us that modernity and coloniality are two sides of the same coin. My problem is, if I, as a Black psychological researcher, go and interact with people on issues, for example, my current work is on intimate partner violence among men. As a critical student of psychology, I always try to foreground the meaning frames of the people with whom I speak. Now, if those very people are living in this kind of juice of coloniality that is everywhere, to what degree am I able to honor this idea of foregrounding people's meaning frames about their own realities without the arrogance of the academy to speak on behalf of people, or assume epistemic grandiosity that I'm the only person who knows how to theorize about life or even gender that they experience as essential as a driver of social life. So I sit in this uncomfortable space as a Black subject, not wanting to speak on behalf of people, but then maybe trying to think about how my work could be doing something different, how maybe I could be raising my own consciousness about the reality of being in the world, rather than the expectation that whenever we speak with people as emancipatory, within emancipatory frames, that we expect that we are raising their consciousness somehow about the reality that they live. So I'm sitting with these problems, and I'm trying to think about what Nontokozo was saying about bringing sacred knowledges that are indigenous into the academy. And I'm worried about how hostile the academy is. I sound very negative because I'm doing analysis on a problematic part of our reality. But I don't know. I'm keen to refuse things. I'm keen to refuse adding to the academic knowledge as I understand it. Yeah.
Thank you, Haley, so much. And you end on a wonderful note. This concept again, and many of you will be aware of. I mean, it's a really productive concept. This idea of refusal, right? This refusal. So people like Duahai Smith, Linda Duahai Smith, was saying this quite a long time ago. Fanon says no. I was saying, so this idea of refusal is another one that we put in our bag. This idea of refusal. A number of people have been writing about it, about you just refuse. It is hard, Haley. I mean, this idea of refusal. But you're also saying something quite, and I want to say this, and please, write it in the chat if you want. So you're saying you are in this moment of, call it complexity, contradiction, challenging moment, but also I think is precisely the moment that you want. Maybe not because not when you want to finish the PhD immediately, but because you realize that there are, what are the strictures, what is limiting, and the academy limits us in particular ways. But you're also realizing that you're bringing a certain way of thinking about gender, about violence, about bodies, to people who have might have different ways of thinking about them. And that is a productive moment. And as it happens, me and my a collaborator, Len Adams, have been having this discussion. I just realized something that I had left behind, that it is not enough just to do transdisciplinary work. It's not even enough for us, just for the academics to talk to the policymakers and the advocates. We have to do this other work. People who are outside, quite on the margins, who don't enter the gates of where we sit, because they have different knowledges, and that knowledge, I take what you're saying against or in response to Nontokozo and Haley. I think what you're saying, that the academy has a certain way of also of dehumanizing, of violating, of excluding, epistemic injustice, basically, epistemic violence. And that comes from the academy. But I think some of us, it's enough that some of us do this work, because we have to make the connections between people with different kinds of way of making knowledge, of different kinds of knowledges. One last thing, this idea of abandoning gender masculinity. I don't know what you think is MenEngage, but this is a really, I think it's a worth, it's not an up in the air kind of thing. It's really, and I know it's been years when I'm sitting with this. Somebody like Jeff Hearn, I don't know whether he's online, but other people who have not written about this have challenged me quite a bit. So Jeff, now Haley, but people like Neo Mkhuba, and other students that says, yeah, but why do we need gender? Why do we need this category, this idea of thinking about bodies, as Joy Owen would say? Why do we need masculinity if there is a coloniality of gender? Because there is, according to Maria Lugones. We could go on talking, but because I want to move to the third part of this, so I'm going to ask Nontokozo to help me how we move to the last part before we get to 5 o'clock.
Thank you. I just want to say to Haile Matudu, for me, you don't sound negative, you just sound very realistic and you're questioning what's happening. So considering history and the topic that we're here to talk about, there's nothing negative about what you're saying. Before we move on, Siawata Makwaye, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Please, your hand has been up for a while and I would like to hear what you have to say.
Yes. Siawata Makwaye is my name. I'm from Maseru, Lesotho. I work for She Have Association. The home. No, I'm very pleased to be part of this platform today, and I would like to check in case I have missed, because I think I'm attending this as the first series. So I would like to check with you if your presentation will or has covered or is covering the question of coloniality when it comes to aid that's given to African countries. And we have an example of a case that has already gone to court today, as I'm talking to you, of European aid that has, through the conditions and the way it has been set up and the policy of the European Union, has embedded conditions there that seems to set people against each other or organizations against each other. And the European Union takes a very passive stance to say, we are not going to intervene, but these are some of the contractual conditions that are seemingly at face value are very harmless, but as you continue, they cause people, they become a fertile ground for conflict to exist. And this aid that is linked or attached to recipient countries promulgating certain legislations that if they don't, then aid will not come. Also, to look at the question of food security in relation to production and availability of seeds, because right now we have the kind of seeds that if you sow them this year and they lose virality if you use the same seeds to reap the seeds for the next harvest. And that says there are companies somewhere, and people have already talked about this, that are going to monopolize seed production so that our production of indigenous seeds is really wiped away and we can no longer do that. But also there is a question of, I noted something here, the issue of language of coloniality. But even as we are talking now and talking from Lesotho, where I am myself, and seeing that there are many other Africans in this platform, that we cannot communicate in an African language, isn't that the continuation and the promotion of the colonial legacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think for me, without shame, I will answer your last question. Yes, it is. It is the continuation, your last question about the language. And I think I already mentioned it. It's a hot spot, right? As I said. So it is one of, so it just shows when we breathe and we live, and this is the box that we are in. And the complexities of what kind of work and how much work and for how long that we need to actually do in order to get where we want to go. And for me, it's always a question of what does it even look like where we want to go? Yeah, because
and Tokozo, just so could there be anybody in this or that is known who could want to document this, what is ongoing right now, where we as an organization are directly affected by the EU contracts that we have signed, and we would love to have this story shared as wide as possible.
Can you just, before you go, so what organization are you talking about?
I work for She Hive Association. She Hive Association.
Okay.
We are based in Maseru, Lesotho. She, for it's a pronoun. So
you can write it on the chat.
Oh yeah, please. Sure. Yeah, let me do that.
Thank you so if anybody has an answer for.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think Kopano, we can move on to the next part.
So Sewata, let me just say, no, we did not touch on coloniality of aid. I don't know in the previous ones, which is, I mean, you know, Dambuzo, is it Dambuzo who writes about that? But sometimes she writes from a different perspective from ours. And the seeds question, quite important. As a matter of fact, just before I came, I was listening to a different one about sugar, related just tangentially. Seeds, and this question, this matter you mentioned is one I am becoming aware. I'm not an expert at all, but I did not know how far-reaching capitalist coloniality it can do. Can just basically own not just the land, but the seeds. And so we have not spoken about that today. And it'd be fantastic if MenEngage see these connections. These connections go to an important part, not the first part, but the second part, not the coloniality of aid. Aid, of course, that is as important. That is really as important because it's like a drug in one sense, some people say. But what we have not spoken about here, and I know it's because of time more than anything, this question that you think is only radical, so really ultra left, or and you can use all kinds of words because we had a president who used that question of our relationship to the land in which we live is a really important one. It becomes even more so today when we confronted with issues of the environment. Decolonization and decoloniality, and working with people who are outside of the urban centers, the metropole, will tell you the relationship we have with the land. And of course, that always includes property relations, right? And we started right there. It's fundamental to decolonization and decoloniality. And when you're starting to think about this, this land where I am has a history. I mean, it's so close, even today, it feels like not too long ago. So people work on the wine farms, and the evisceration of their dignity, of their humanity, even today still exists, because the relationship between the landlord, who owns huge tracts of land, and the workers who are paid sometimes with wine. I understand it still happens. So farm workers. And so there are NGOs and organizations who work on this. And of course, that I'm tying the seeds to this idea of of extractivist capitalist coloniality. Extractivism is important, not just about it. It is a mode of thinking about the world, and that's another term. But by this I mean is the knowledge we have, where you're sitting, and Lakshman might be here or others. So one has to be quite careful about this, and we do this all the time, that the model of knowledge follows the model of capital. That capital goes into poor countries and extracts, and it sends it to London, it sends to New York, it sends it to the capitals of the world, right? That's it. Extractivism is a central part of a big capital, multinational capital of the super rich. They extract, and then they can, they use big capital, use lobbies for all kinds of things that they know hurt people, right? But it starts with the relationship with the land. The land. So when we get to the question of language, and this is the more I move. So I've showed you, I didn't show you the first book. Oh yeah, I'm showing, which is not what I wanted to show you, but this is the book. I don't want to show you the book, but I am showing it to you. This is Ngugi's first book, or a book of essays, Decolonizing the Mind. This is a book of literature. It's about literature and theater. I'm not in theater, about language. Language is an important part. And one of the things that I always come back, this is another copy I have. Ngugi tells a story about when he was just before he goes to jail, when, the government jails him and starts banning him. But there's a line when he's talking about the language of African fiction. He says, so this woman comes, well, first he tells a story about this old woman in this village who comes, close to where he lives, asks Ngugi to use his knowledge for them, to help them in theater, because you're a man of knowledge. But somewhere around this time, he starts to decide something and says, I had a crisis after I had written another novel, Grain of Wheat. I knew whom I was writing about, but who was I writing for? So you take the stories of the people, because you're a writer, but who are you writing for? This question of audiences is really important for me. And for Ngugi says, if you are going to write in English for the people, there's some dishonesty right there. It's because the language, colonial, the empires could not have people they colonize speak their languages. They could not because they want to hear what you're saying. Which, some of us are intermediaries. We're taught this, we become professors, we become CEOs, we become activists, but the language we use does not heed what Ngugi is saying. And I know this is a cop-out. This is really, for me, Ngugi says, it's a defeatist. But I say, Ngugi, I know it's defeatist. I wish, but I think I have an advantage at some points, because although I can speak the languages, what I don't do is write in them, and write when I extract the knowledge and send it out in the world. And this is a blight in my work, and I need help on this. I don't know how to deal with this part about writing. So I'm very happy when I see, and Siabelo, I don't know, I thought you were another Siabelo that I know, when people write in African languages. I just bought, when they say the first book and first novel in South Africa, or in Africa sometimes, for the first book, they never talk about Thomas Mofolo. Thomas Mofolo's book is the first novel. It was written in Sesotho, and people should be reading about it. So can I allow me just to because I had this last section, 2 sections, and these 2 sections are about really resources, and I could mention a lot of books, a lot of concepts that I mentioned: extractivism, coloniality, decoloniality. Somewhere in previous session, you spoke about colonial mentality, epistemic injustice, locus of enunciation. So the terms that we receive from, that we generate, but also other people, about how to think about the world as it is, are important. And here is where I'm going to show this and then also show. So I wanted to go back, to double back to somewhere where I was. I don't know whether you have read, because this book, when I wanted to talk to you, I don't know why we're not having lots. But she's saying some things, by the way, that other people have said. Bell Hooks has said that. The Combahee River Collective said it. Combahee River Collective. They have said what young people, old people are saying outside of books. And the book she's written is called Against White Feminism. This is Zakaria Rafia. And I have the book right here. Came in 2021. And she offers a different, so this book I like, I got it because she speaks about coloniality. Although she speaks about white feminism, the book at some point talks about how this point I mentioned, there are feminist colonialists, colonial feminists. It's because in one sense you want to protect the rights of white supremacy, even when you talk about gender equality. That's a really odd thing. I mean, how could you? But you can understand that the more you go. So she says things like this. At the beginning of the book, a white feminist is someone who refuses to consider the role that whiteness and the racial privilege attached to it have played and continue to play in universalizing white feminist concerns, agendas, and beliefs as those of all feminism, all feminists. She goes on to say, you do not have to be white to be a white feminist. That's a really important point right there. So she's not talking about skin color. She's talking about a certain way the world is organized. She's talking about structures. She's talking about an attitude. It is also perfectly possible to be white and feminist and not be a white feminist. So you could look light-skinned, or as we call it, classified, identify as white, but still refuse this privilege that you get of speaking. So the term for her describes certain assumptions and behaviors which have been baked in mainstream white feminism, Western feminism, rather than describing the racial identity of its subject. At the same time, it is true that most white feminists are indeed white because they're not thinking about coloniality, they're not thinking about whiteness, white supremacy, and that. So this is her later on, and this is the picture of the book. About how, I'm gonna skip that part, okay, can do this. And a version, so this is come from two parts, I've just edited it, hopefully well. Another version to acknowledging lived trauma perpetrated by white feminism. And this question that Sabic you're talking about, this, that for instance, that you really enjoy the privileges. You don't refuse the privileges of white supremacy, even while you're talking about gender or race. And then, which in turn produces a discomfort towards an alienation from women who have experienced it. Sorry about that. I've sensed it every time I found myself in such a conversation, but I've only recently been able to recognize it's an action to exploit assumptions of the value of voices that I've experienced before. So it's something we differentiate between the people who speak and the people who suffer. The people who suffer are not people who speak. And that's an important part about it, that you have to refuse this as a, so that's Zakaria. And she traces some people who are working for gender equality, and that's why this is important, gender equality, and yet they don't want to fight against colonialism, white colonialism, white racism in the colonies. And so this is a book, one book I think we have to recommend, and we have to layer it again on this book. I don't have it on the picture right there. There's not just this book, the other book by Fanon. I could go all day about Franz Fanon, because Fanon offers us a language, not just of the structures, but also of the psyche. So that's the second book, and I've mentioned Ngugi, so that's the book I'm not remembering. Ngugi has a third book. So these are three books only, really I mentioned, Moving the Center. And I like the old essays by Ngugi saying, but we have to rethink the center of our work. I'm extrapolating. If you are going to think from the perspective as if colonialism has not happened, as if we don't live in coloniality. And Google uses imperialism in his own language, and I love it. And here, for instance, that's in Google, he says, you can see the connections between this and what Maldonado Torres says. Yet imperialism, both in its colonial and neo-colonial stages, is the one force that affects everything. And he says a lot of other things. So this essay, so Ngui says, but we have to shift the center of, but also what we put at the center of our work. We cannot think of gender as if it's not itself part of this colonial legacy, but the way we think about men and women. Right. So that's it. Let me offer it the same thing in a different way, because it'll make sense. So I have written somewhere about Amy Césaire, who was a teacher of Frantz Fanon. At some point, he was a member of the Communist Party. And you can put this in gender, because the work we do in MenEngage. So I'm a member, I was part of Sonke Gender Justice. Sonke Justice is part of MenEngage. So think about, you can use a parallel like that. You can use it for anything really. So Amy Césaire is part of the French Communist Party. At some point, Stalin starts killing people. And then Amy Césaire is unhappy. Amy Césaire is, of course, a poet and a writer who's in France. He said, no, I'm going to resign from the Communist Party. He writes a letter. The letter goes to Maurice, the Secretary General, General Secretary of the Communist Party. And Césaire writes there, of course, he's angry about that the French Communist Party is not condemning Stalin, horrible person who's using the language of socialism to kill people. Brutal. But in that letter, Césaire makes certain observation. He says something about the peculiarity of our situation. So he is quite aware that colonialism makes it important, is an important part of being in a certain body in the world. And that situation should not be confused. So that's why when you are a particular, from the colonies, as it were, when you are from the colonies, you're Black, you're brown, and you get to be a member of French, you have to have this, what somebody called the techniques of appearance. You are called a Black Marxist, or you're called a female Marxist, but let's talk about really color in this particular case, or an African Marxist. So Césaire is talking about the secularity of our problems, which cannot be reduced to any other problem, the secularity of our history. She's talking about this epoch-making force that I spoke about, constructed out of the terrible misfortunes that belong only to us. And he's really directing our attention that the contradiction, of course, is this. At the center of the Communist Party is also whiteness, is also coloniality. He might not have used it that way, but he's talking about, I think, the exact same thing. So if we are doing MenEngage work, we have to constantly remember this, that there is precisely this, that it is who is the subject, what is the subject and then in the center of our work, and how can we reapproach it with the tools of decoloniality.
Thank you, Kopano. We didn't even take a break today. I'm just having awareness of that, and I would like to apologize for that. I hope people are taking care of your needs and you're taking care of yourselves. When you need a break, that you take a break. We are actually left with 10 minutes, and I would just like to open the floor. If there's anything that is moving, anything that feels like you want to share, this is the time. If you could raise your hand if you have any questions for Kopano.
Or anyone else in the...
Or anyone else in this, yes. Yeah, I'm just like grateful that you raised the issue of white feminism, because it's something that I'm really currently really researching and reading books about. And I think it's really important that we bring that into the discussion as well. It's a very important topic to talk about that. So thank you for that. And thank you for sharing all these beautiful books. And you've mentioned so many other authors that you didn't show their books. And I'm just thinking, oh, I have to watch this again and write down all the names and the books so we can share them. Thank you for that. It's really rich. Yeah, are there any thought processes happening, feelings, one word, few sentences? What's going on? Thanks, Bianca. I see your hands, but I just want to give a chance to the people who are feeling shy, to just say, this is your moment. I know we didn't go into breakout rooms. Some people, it's easier to discuss things in small groups. So, so if you're feeling shy, just feel free to just take this moment and use it to say something.
Why don't you allow me while they are still contemplating?
Yeah, sure. I was going to say that. Okay. Well, the shy people are still thinking. It's okay.
Yes, I'm trying to maybe pose a question to any other people that are here, or in your experiences in terms of the language that we use when we address these very really serious issues, and that there are people who perhaps I'm just trying to come closer to people that sometimes when you talk about topics that could have books like Against White Feminism, and then we have our own white people who are our allies, and that we are possibly not antagonizing them unnecessarily, that even our language could be, I see Hailey is reacting there, and I but I just wanted to make sure that no one feels attacked, and that we are not in a way actually perpetuating the same tendencies and behaviors that we are saying we do not like. Thank you.
But can I step in right there? Maybe Hailey wanted to say something, but let me be clear. Maybe you came in late today. I don't know. Maybe you came in early. And that's an important thing. I mean, thank you for that. But I'm sure the people are stronger here. And I picked out of this book this important thing. You don't have to be white identified to be a white feminist. So this is not about color. It's about a logic. It's about who is it, what kind of logic is at the center of it. So that's an important thing, right? It's a really, really important distinction in your head that when people say white, of course, some people might feel, oh, they're talking about me. No, they're talking about, do you believe in this beliefs, the assumptions made by this theoretical universe? That's an important thing. Do you subscribe to that? Just as I would subscribe to capitalism, that capitalism is good, but because it doesn't have the word a racial identity, people might not feel like that. So that's a really important work that, what Rafia Zakaria is talking about is not racism. It's not about it. It's about whose experiences, who writes, who is supposed to be this, quiet in a room. That's it. Really, this is what I'm putting to us. That when we're doing work, I know some of us do this, I know that MenEngage holders, who is in the room? Who's speaking? What languages are we speaking about? That's an important. And so she goes about the beliefs, the coloniality of it, and the supremacist attitude in it. That's important. So people have to make this distinction, and it comes with, all right, we're talking about knowledge here. We're talking about how knowledge is disseminated, the language of the knowledge, who is writing this knowledge, who's supposed to be the recipient, and that sort of. But you put it to us about, I hope people take this on. This is not about reverse racism, whatever you want to call it. And Hailey, you might have something to say, because I'm sure you, as they say, you were shaking or reacting.
Hi. Yeah. Yes, because I think that I get a visceral reaction to this centering of whiteness whenever we are speaking about decolonization and coloniality, the feelings of white people are the most important things in the room. And I think that if you have centuries of people being centered and being used to being centered, you get this consideration and actually an over consideration. So I have usually in my classroom, this is a statement I read. I'd like to ask those who may have been conditioned to raise their hands to speak first, who may have been told that their voices are always valid and important, to think for a moment about those who may have been conditioned to think that their voices are not valid, that their opinions are not important to be heard, that their presence is inferior, whose lived experiences are overlooked and are told that they have little to contribute. This, I would usually say, is a space, a safe space where voices of Black, brown, colored, queer, trans, non-binary, people of color, differently able voices are encouraged to take up space, to speak up and speak freely. This is not to silence the privileged, but to encourage everyone in this space to be particularly critical and to reflect on their own position and privilege and to reflect on the way in which they take up space in this class. This kind of, I suppose, might explain my reaction to your invitation for us to be considerate of white folk. And I understood that what we were talking about here was not to center white people, but to center decolonization and the presence of coloniality in our lives. So that's my position on that, sorry.
No, there's no story about it. Thank you, Haley. One of the things I know, and this is the sad part about, of course, engaging online, but this is the only way we can do it. But a simple act of, and Haley was saying this, male-bodied people like me, a simple act of shutting up when you are in a space where, with a female-bodied person, with women and gender non-conforming people, is precisely what you're saying. Just don't privilege yourself. This is not about, even if you hear men are trash or whatever, don't privilege yourself. This is not about you. And so basically we're in that space right against about, and we learn all the time, just that, but also to work with this affect, like, okay, what am I feeling here? And then hopefully make progress. Thank you, Haley, for that.
Thank you.
And for the questions,
we only have like 3 minutes. Annika, I see your hand up. I don't know if you want to add something or do you have a question? It might not be answered. So
no, I just wanted to add to what Haley said before he said it. I had a very visceral reaction to the term reverse racism, because I think in our work we hear a lot about what about the men? As feminist workers, we hear a lot about what about the men? And it's just really exhausting trying to create a space for the oppressor in a space where we're like women or non-binary individuals are supposed to have voices. And I think the term reverse racism for me, I just had a complete visceral reaction to that. So thank you for that, Haley.
Thank you. I think with that, I just want to thank everybody that has contributed today, especially Kopano for the rich knowledge that you have shared with us. And I also want to say what just happened right now is very important, and I want to find the right words. It's really important. It's what we call a hotspot in processing, because we've processed a lot of subjects, and the next subject that is coming up now is a subject about race. And so it has come in the room because it feels, I suppose, indigenously, it's like it's a ghost role, imemoria. So it's here with us, and it wants to be spoken into. It wants to be spoken into. So I want to welcome it. However, since we live in the colonial world of time and pressure of time, this will be great now for us to take a break and then come back and say, hey, the issue of race has come up, and how we deal with race issues with the connection with the topic of colonialism. So I'm glad that we were able to support each other and handle this topic in the way that we did. And just to say, the invitation is for us to do our inner work and knowing where you have your power and privileges, where you hold them. And when you come into spaces like this, to come with awareness of your power and privileges. And if you're taking any offense in the work that's being done, that you go back and find a space where you can process that and understand why is it that your body is receiving any offense from what you're hearing. So we can all grow muscles of being able to do introspection and understand ourselves and understand what's happening in the world in order to create the world that we want to see. And with that, I am so grateful to all of you. I'm grateful to so many people that had showed up today. I'm grateful to the MenEngage and Bianca for the work you do, and for the core team that we're working with to create these spaces. And again, with all this richness and all these questions and all this knowledge in this room, we are inviting you to please write to us and let us know what would you like to contribute. Do you want to do a presentation? Is there something that you want to share? Do you want to go deeper into these topics? Please write to us so we can, this is for you. It's not for us to come up with the ideas of the topics. It's up to you. So please do write to us. Please do volunteer yourself to say, I want to be part of this. I have something to share. You don't have to be an expert in it. Share what you have to share so we can all contribute together as a village, as a community. And again, Kopano, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody.
Thank you for the invitation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.